Hi everyone, welcome to Subtle Asian Book Club's March Book of the Month. We have been reading Jade City, and today we have with us the wonderful, amazing, and talented Fonda Lee. I'm Tiffany, I read by Tiffany.
I'm Alexandra at Twirling Pages.
I'm Breana at Milky Booze.
And today we have with us Fonda Lee. Fonda, would you like to please introduce yourself, introduce your book, and maybe as a quick little icebreaker, tell us what you've been loving or what you've been doing during quarantine?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me on the book club. And I'm Fonda Lee, the author of the Greenbone Saga, which starts with Jade City and continues in Jade War and concludes later this year with Jade Legacy. And for those of you who are just hopping on, haven't been part of the book club, haven't been reading the book, it is a epic urban Asia-inspired gangster family saga. I know that is a mouthful, but that is probably the most succinct way that I have found to describe it. I've heard it also described as The Godfather with magic and kung fu. And I'm also the author of a few other novels as well, some science fiction novels, including Exo and Crossfire and Zero Boxer. I have some short fiction, some comics out there, and I'm excited to be here. For over the period of the quarantine, my hobbies have mostly consisted of getting takeout and watching anime. I've been doing a lot of both. So this time last year, my family was like, well, for as long as this quarantine lasts, we're going to get takeout every weekend. And now we have tried a whole lot of restaurants because we've been keeping that up. And I'm very excited for the series finale of Attack on Titan tonight. So that has been a new regular hobby here in my household.
Yay! So exciting. So let's just jump right into all the questions because I'm sure everybody is really excited to talk about all things Jade City. Jade City has and also disclaimer, we're going to talk about spoilers. So if you haven't read Jade City, you should probably leave now. But
come back later. Go read the book and then come back later.
Yeah. It'll be on our YouTube, so you can watch it. You can watch it again later. So let's jump right into the research since this book has a lot of an in-depth world. What was the research process like for developing the clan structure and the naming? Because there are positions like the Weatherman, the Horn, the Pillar, etc.
So the clans were inspired largely by a lot of research that I did into organized crime. So even though the Greenbone clans in KCON are not technically crime outfits, I wanted to create the feel of a gangster saga like Goodfellas, The Godfather, those sorts of crime drama shows. And I did a bunch of research into the Yakuza, into the Sicilian Mafia, into the triads, and I didn't base the clans on any specific structure, but what I did was kind of take common elements and things that I found compelling and put them together. So, for example, the family structure of the clans is based very much on the Mafia. The body modification, the honorifics, the hierarchical structure is very much based on the Yakuza, and then a lot of the flowery oaths and the titles come from inspiration from the triads. Then when it came to naming, so first of all, I love naming stuff. I think that is one of the most satisfying parts of being a science fiction and fantasy author is getting to create an in-world vocabulary. And for the clans, I wanted to create terms that evoked a feeling in sort of an oblique way, but would really sort of stick in the mind as having a certain tone to them. So the pillar, for example, a word that really connotes something that's the center of the organization, that's very stable, strong. The horn is something that sounds like aggressive and military, and you've got the weatherman, a position that is supposed to be farsighted, that is supposed to be looking into the future and they have the term reading the clouds. That's an in-world term. And then I do that with all the positions in in the story. And I also just love naming everything in the world, right? The restaurants, the cars, the streets, the districts. So that's very much part of my process of making the world feel real and lived in.
I'm thinking of the armpit as one of the clan areas.
I mean, the armpit I named because, first of all, it sounds kind of seedy, but also because of the geography of it, right? Like I built the map of Janloon and tried to think of like some of the geographical elements of that city that would lend themselves to a name. So, you know, there's high ground, there's, you know, there's the armpit, there's, yeah. So making the world feel like it has a history and there's like a reason for things being called what they are.
I know you mentioned a second ago about like the weatherman reading the clouds as being kind of an in-world vocabulary. That was one of my favorite things actually that I picked up on, and especially when it comes back at the end with Doru's letter to Shay, and he's like, "I'm not telling you this as your uncle. You know, a good weatherman's always reading the clouds." I think like the gravity of that was made so much better knowing the context of it in the story, and it's like one of my favorite things. Like I want to get a tattoo of it someday. It was just something about it. I was like, I love the idea of like the weatherman and always knowing what's going on and how their source of information is never questioned by the pillar. They're just coming with all the goods. And it just, I had a spine chill when I read that line.
Well, I love seeding things into the story that then resonate in some way later down the road. So I think that part of the craft of writing a fantasy novel is setting up information in a way that when the reader encounters it in an important moment, it just clicks, like it all makes sense. So, for example, the term coming down from the forest has a historical connotation in the world of Kekon because of the history of the clans and the fact that they used to be a resistance movement hiding out, you know, in these camps in the forest, you know, fighting for Kekon's freedom. And I introduced that in a fairly kind of matter-of-fact world-building way earlier on, so that when I do use it in the heat of a moment, when war breaks out, then I'm not explaining it there. It's already been explained elsewhere. So then you feel like you're part of the world and you understand the gravity of what that means when it comes back up.
And I know at the end, I had read, there's like a little question and answer at the end of the book that I got to look through that you mentioned there's a lot of research that you did that you didn't necessarily include in the book, but kind of informed the way that you wrote the follow-up novels. Was there anything that you found really interesting that you wanted to include, but just didn't fit into Jade City?
Well, it's hard to say because I think everything that I research is there somewhere. So everything that I want to include is part of the world. It just might not be foregrounded in the story. So, you know, there's a saying among writers that world building is like an iceberg. And the reader gets to see the tip of the iceberg that's like poking up out of the water. And that's part of the narrative. But as an author, you've built the entire rest of the iceberg. And it's just not visible because it's not a core part of the story. So, you know, for example, I did a ton of research into like diamond mining and trade. And I found out interesting things about how like De Beers basically created a global diamond monopoly because that was such a good allegory for how jade was controlled in this world. Is that like a big part of the narrative? No, but like the way that I thought about how the KJA, the Kekon Jade Alliance, would operate was to some extent influenced by that research. So it's all there. It's kind of all in the background. It's just not something that requires exposition in the story, but it's, you know, it's part of it. Same with, like, for example, I did research into the triads and how the origin of the triads was very much rooted in, you know, nationalistic secret societies that wanted to expel like foreign control of China, like hundreds of years ago. And so that like fed into some of the history of the clans and fighting against like Shatarian occupation. So those are things that like weren't important in the narrative, but they all exist. And then there's things that I find that come back later in some way, even if they don't make it into like an earlier book. So like new advances in like gem mining, you know, something that I would stumble across that comes back in a big way in Jade Legacy, because technology advances and you'll find like new ways of jade mining. So those are the sorts of things that sometimes I find in the course of research that I put in my back pocket and might get pulled back out when there's reason and cause to do so later on.
Exciting.
As we were preparing for this interview, we looked at some other interviews that you did, and when people asked you like, who's your favorite character, you said that you didn't want to say anything because Jade Legacy might reveal certain things. But we wanted to ask you, did you have like a most interesting character to write and explore? Maybe someone who is extremely frustrating for you to write about, and if you wanted to reveal anything about that.
So one reason I struggle with this question is because I knew going into writing it that it would be an ensemble cast of characters. And I wanted them all to feel equally important. And I've said at times that there is only one main character in the Greenbone Saga, and that is the Cull family. And every member of the Cull family is holding it up in a different way. So every time that when I was writing Jade City, if I felt like I was giving short shift to like one of the characters, or one of the other characters was getting too much emphasis, then I would take it as a professional challenge to like boost up the others so that they all felt like they were intrinsic to the narrative. But in terms of like actually writing them, I have to say I find Hilo the funnest or most interesting character to write. I have sort of mixed feelings about Shay, because in some regards, she and I have a lot in common, and that makes it almost more difficult for me to write her because I see like her flaws in certain ways, and like and so there's a little bit of like me having to disconnect in order to like write her, and then I think that there's I don't think that I would say any one of them is frustrating. Like I genuinely want to write all of them because I have to know them all so well in order to spend so much time with them. But I think maybe one of the most challenging characters to write was Lon, because I knew what happened to him. And so I had to get very emotionally invested in him and write him almost like walking a tightrope, where I had to both emphasize his strengths and his weaknesses in like a very balanced way, so that you knew who he was in like a relatively short amount of time, and everything that happened to him had to feel credible and had to land with impact. So he was perhaps the most challenging character to write in Jade City, because in early drafts, I would ask the characters, I would ask my readers, beta readers, how certain things were landing in the story, and they would maybe like, oh, it's, they didn't see why he was doing that, or it wasn't sad enough, or whatever. And so like I kept having I had to be very efficient and economical in building him, and always be kind of holding his strengths and weaknesses in both of my hands.
How can I make Lon's death most painful?
Yeah, exactly. It was that was a challenging thing to do.
Yeah, it's like authors love to hurt their readers, but also in the process, you also hurt yourself.
Yes. Yep. Unless I feel really sad and devastated, the reader isn't going to. So I have to keep working the story to maximize my pain before I'm confident that it'll cause pain to others.
Oh, it was painful.
Yeah.
Everyone would go on and they'd be like, chapter 31.
What? Spoiler tag of screaming. But I love how within the huge cast of characters, everyone is kind of morally gray, and there is no like one person who is like super good. Like as you mentioned before, even Lon is someone who is super, he is like, because of his death, sometimes he can be put on a pedestal, but when you were writing his character, you made sure to highlight his strengths and his weaknesses. But did you find it difficult to make sure that all of your characters were sympathetic to the reader despite being deeply flawed?
Not really, and I think it's because I don't think about it that way. Like, I don't think of my goal being to make the character sympathetic to the reader. I want to make them feel as real as possible. So I don't need you to agree with them or sympathize with them or like them. I need you to understand them. So that's my goal, is to write characters that feel as human as possible. There's plenty of fiction where the characters are pretty stock and, they're sympathetic because they're kind of more virtuous than normal human beings would be, right? And when we talk about flawed characters, we're all flawed, like all human beings, right? We're all flawed. And so for me, writing a character who's flawed is just writing a human. It's just writing a person. And so I don't think about, is what this character doing likable? Does it make them sympathetic? I just think, well, would they do this? What would be their motivation for their actions? Like, what's driving them right now? And I think that then I'm not trying to think downstream to how the reader will react. I'm trying to live, within the character. And then, later on, I see how people react. And sometimes it surprises me and sometimes it doesn't, right? So, even a character like Bero, who, a lot of people hate with reason, is still a character that like deserves my attention. Not from like I'm making him like, I'm trying to make him awful or I'm trying to make him sympathetic. Like he's just a character that I'm trying to also, that I'm trying to make understandable, even if you hate him, right? Like, do you understand why he's doing the things he's doing? That's the litmus test for me.
Yeah, speaking of Bero, I think especially after I started, I'm about halfway through Jade War now. I'm not no spoilers for Jade War, don't worry, you guys, but with Bero's specifically, I know you were talking, the main characters are called family. And then Bero is kind of the only POV character we get who has no connection to the clan. I mean, obviously with events that happen, he becomes connected to the events, but to no knowledge of the Call family. Like, he doesn't have any of that money, of that power, of that training, and we get to see him on the outside of it. And we see, even though a lot of people, as you mentioned, do villainize him and hate him, and they're like, oh, we want Bero to die. But when you were writing him, was he included as a POV character to kind of balance out reading about the Call family who had all of this weight on their shoulders from the power that they were given? And you get to kind of see someone who's just a civilian who's caught up in a world of Jade where they don't have access to it.
He became that. So Bero is an interesting case of a character who walked onto the page and then did not leave. So I initially envisioned Bero as a framing device, because for me to open the story with Hilo and the Twice Lucky talking about all the clan politics and the ongoing or the bubbling conflict with the mountain is a lot to take in. So I envisioned Bero as a way to introduce the world through the mind of somebody who has very simplistic motivations and who lusts after Jade. And through Bero's eyes, you would see the power of Jade and why it's so coveted. So that was my initial motivation, was Bero was going to be an entry character for us to get into the story, and he would run into Hilo, and then we could meet the whole Call family. And then I would use him again at the end so that he would kind of book cap the story, be a framing device. And then that didn't happen because he showed up again. And then he got more enmeshed in everything. And then I realized that there was a reason this was happening. And that was because he did provide a counterpoint to the Cull family, right? Everyone in every other POV character is connected to the clans in a very, and it's sort of hard to see the water you swim in, right? So he was character who was so far removed from the clans that he actually made the world feel more fleshed out and less insular because he wasn't part of that ruling class. And he also became a thematic force, right? He in many ways, Bero embodies the force of chaos or luck, right? The Kekanese are often talking about luck, and luck plays kind of a big part in the way they think about the world. And Bero is always thinking about luck and whether he's lucky and unlucky. So he became kind of this, and because he's so far below the notice of the clans, he's like that. I don't know, like he's in some ways he's like a thorn, but he's also unpredictable in a way that because he's not bound into the structure of the clans, and so he's very useful from a narrative perspective. And he just of all the characters, he was the one that I didn't see becoming as important as he did. And then once he did, I was like, oh, of course, that's what Bero's role would be.
Yeah, I love Bero's chapters. I feel like they gave insight to this whole other side of like what's everyone else doing, that when they're not going out doing Hilo's dirty work or like working with Shay or in the business aspect of it, like what is just a random person who wants to seek power doing. And it was really, really fun to read those chapters. So I'm really happy you included it. And then built Bero, yeah.
And he gets into so many more difficulties later on, which, I mean, needless to say, he'll get into it. There'll be more unexpected things that happen to him in Jade Legacy. So yes. Bero is I think I have a soft spot for him as a writer, right? Because he is someone who can be like that outside force that like gets me into different places that the main characters wouldn't be, right? So like he can be the person who's with talking to the rats and the smugglers and the criminals, and like that's a very useful role to have in the narrative.
So we're going to transition into the overarching theme because like yes, okay. Anyway, I was like trying to segue nicely, and then I was like, this isn't going to work, so I'm just going to go for it. Okay.
They're all interconnected.
Yeah, they're all interconnected. I couldn't find a good way, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Okay. How did your experiences as part of the Asian diaspora inspire the events in the book? Because Jade City is so much Asian inspired.
I'd say it really had an influence in two ways. The first being that in my mind, Jade City is a very Asian American work. And the reason for that is because it pulls very strongly from storytelling influences from both East and West. So as an Asian American, I feel very inspired as a writer from cross-cultural influences. And so obviously this series is influenced by epic fantasy and the whole tradition of Western literature in fantasy. It's influenced by like Martin Scorsese films, right? Like The Godfather, right? And crime dramas in the West. But it's also very deeply influenced by wuxia and by Hong Kong crime dramas and by Asian culture and history. So it's a work that I wrote for me as an Asian American, taking these things that I loved from both East and West and mashing them together in a way that felt real and organic and its own thing. And I've talked about this before, how KCON is not one country in Asia, because people sometimes ask me, is it based on Hong Kong? Is it based on Taiwan or Japan? And I'm like, no, it's none of those places. It's like Wakanda, right? It is something that that existed, erupted out of my brain because as an Asian American, I would consume things from East and West and try to reconcile them in terms of my own tastes and my own identity. So that's one way. And the second way that it had a huge influence on this story was that, and again, will not spoil Jade War territory, but there's a considerable depiction of diaspora in this series. And the whole Kekanese diaspora becomes a very big part of this story. And that was personally meaningful to me because I rarely see that in fantasy. Oftentimes epic fantasy has, a kingdom where these people have lived for thousands of years and there's this bloodline and, there's races there that have been there forever, like elves and dwarfs. But oftentimes epic fantasy has this feeling of ancientness and timelessness. And I didn't want to write that. I wanted to write a fantasy that felt very much in conversation with a modern era. And diaspora and the migration of people is a huge part of that, is part of like my experience, is part of, all of your experiences. So I see that conversation with diaspora and migration more commonly in science fiction, right? We see a lot of science fiction stories where humanity leaves Earth and now they've spread to the stars and there's people who've colonized different worlds. And how are they different from their Earth ancestors? And how does their culture develop? And, it's not just like an offshoot anymore. It's its own thing. It's influenced by like other cultures they come in contact with. And that was something that I wanted to bring into this fantasy story.
I wanted to also talk about this. I don't know how to frame this as a question because I think it's very open-ended, but in connection to both the plot and characters you were talking about prior and about the major themes of the book, you mentioned a lot of things about like classic ways that people like to build fantasy worlds, about it being timeless and etc. And I notice often now in modern times that when people write fantasy, sometimes they decide to make it more of a utopia. Like there's no misogyny, there's no racism, there's no, a lot of things that kind of hurt our social standing. Like they choose to write a fantasy world without those elements. But you for sure, you see with Lon's pride with wearing jade in public, with Aitmata's rise to power and her having to kill so many people in order to be seen as a legitimate heir to the role of the pillar. There's a lot of themes of both misogyny and toxic masculinity that I guess kind of frame how the characters react to things and how they stand in the story. Was that a deliberate choice on your part, or was it kind of just informed by lived experiences?
Yeah, no, it was very deliberate choice. And I've said this a few times that I think when you write speculative fiction, you can choose to write the world as you want it to be and the world as it is, the way that you see it. And I'm very much in the latter. I always want to write the truth as I see it. I want the world that I'm writing, the fictional world that I'm writing, to feel as real as possible. And that includes, all the social issues, the struggles, the power dynamics, the gender dynamics, the race dynamics, everything that we put up with in our own world exists in my fictional worlds. And, the reality is, like, I'm writing a story that is set in an analogous time period to like mid to late 20th century, right? Which is dealing with a lot of change, including modernization, globalization, changes in like gender roles. And this is a world that is very, the world of organized crime and the mafia is like very hyper masculine. There's like violence is very hyper masculine in that world. And so like you've got if I'm writing characters like Shay and Ait, that is part of their lived reality, right? Like if you wanted to become a mob boss in the Sicilian mafia and you were a woman, that would not be an easy road for you to travel. And it is not an easy road for Aitmata to travel. So that is like, that's part of the realness of the world for me, is that I don't want to kind of just brush aside all of those things and write a fictional world that is utopian. I want the characters to struggle in ways that feel very recognizable. And so, I think there's there's a difficulty sometimes when a reader's expectations bump up against what a book is. So if a reader wants to read, you know, an escapist fantasy in which there isn't sexism and racism and patriarchy and cruelty, you know, like, and isn't that, then this is probably not, you know, the right book for them. So the other thing that went into that choice was the fact that I am a big fan of, you know, crime dramas and gangster sagas, and the female characters in those stories, by and large, are very absent. Either they're victims or they're sidelined, right? They're like mob wife. They're like Call Sen's or Hilo and Shay's mom, who is like very much a typical mob wife. Like, I'm not going to see this, like, you know, and so. So when I was writing the characters in this story, you know, that was something that I wanted to take into account, was that, you know, there is a reality of like women being involved in these sorts of organizations. Like, I was doing research and I found out about like women in like the Sicilian mafia who have taken over the organization because like the men have been arrested and put in jail. There was like a Yakuza boss who took over one of the major Yakuza organizations after her husband died, like for a period. So they exist, but they live in a very hyper-masculine society, one that's very violent and very dangerous. And that was always part of, you know, of the underlying structure of this world. And there's a challenge when you're writing a world like that to not be too heavy-handed, right? So for me, I always wanted it to feel just like, I mean, you almost don't notice it, right? It's like in our world, like there's times you go through life and you don't notice the sexism or the racism. That kind of just lives in the air, you know, and then sometimes it really does come up and affect you. So that's the same sort of experience that I wanted to put into both the characters and the reader experience.
I really love how strong-willed all the female characters are. Mara, as frustrating as she is, I think there's so much respect for her, especially during the scene where she's talking with Shay about how they should both just like form an alliance together at the very end. And even for Wen, she's so, I can understand why Hilo doesn't want her involved in clan affairs, especially because she's a Stone Eye, but her just wanting to do so much for the clan is probably like one of the big reasons why Hilo loves her so much too.
Yeah, and I also wanted to write them in a way where it's not obvious that they're making, you know, the right choice. Like, as much as I think readers root for the characters, like they root for someone like Wen because she has all these disadvantages and she wants to be part of the clan and its affairs and to help her family. But you don't necessarily, and you know, Jade War explores this more, those don't necessarily turn out right. Like the way, you know, like there's consequences to every action, no matter how well intended they are. And same with Shay. Shay is a very smart person. Some of the judgment calls she makes, you know, so, you know, that's what I wanted to have throughout, was like all these characters are making the best choices that they can based on who they are and the circumstances that they find themselves in. But the consequences are real and they're not always what, you know, these characters are hoping for.
I finished Jade War yesterday and I was just like,
oh
my God, I need the next book now. But we can't talk about Jade War spoilers, so we'll refrain from that. So moving into the next question, then Jade City briefly discusses the role of imperialism, like you said before, about how there's like so many external factors. There's a diaspora experience of many of the characters, especially after the Many Nations War through the Espenians and the Shatarians. And we can probably like expect more of this in Jade War and Jade Legacy. So how did you really draw from world history to form this structure of your books?
So the Greenbone Saga started out with in my mind, with a very clear aesthetic. And that placed it in a certain point in time because, you know, I wasn't going to write, when you think like of like a gangster saga, you immediately think things like muscle cars and Tommy guns and streets and alleyways, right? And so, you know, this was never going to be something that took place like in pre-modern times. And then as I fleshed it out, it became really clear to me where to place it, because the sort of latter half post-World War II period in Asia was one of such huge change, economic growth, right? The rise of the Four Tigers and Singapore and Japan, Taiwan and Korea, like just booming, and also westernizing, modernizing, and then that's also the period of the Cold War, right? So there was so much going on in that time, and that felt like such a it just felt like the right place for this story to occur. And like I said before, I very much wanted to write a story that felt like it was in conversation with history, but modern history, as opposed to like ancient history. So a lot of the things that were happening in the latter half of the 20th century are sort of in the background of the Greenbone saga, but like not in the exact same way, right? So like the Cold War in our world and the nuclear armament that happened doesn't play a role in this story, because the main focus is like the jade trade, right? And like, so there's sort of a, I don't know, there's like Cold War of jade almost going on there. And there's, but a lot of what KCON is going through in terms of like modernization and globalization, and like whether or not they should like admit foreigners, whether they should sell jade to foreigners, those are all very pertinent and recognizable questions that were issues in our own world. So I very much am kind of aware of the background, but am sort of twisting them, right? I'm like turning them in my own way so that like the themes are there and like the issues are there, but like they're there in a different way. And you'll see more of that in Jade Legacy because it spans a larger period of time. So there's like more social change, right? Like and you'll see technology change as well. I do though often, I often am amused by like the readers who are like, I don't get it. Why don't they have cell phones? I'm always like, you're just too young.
Or like, why are they using guns when they can just use jade?
Yeah, I mean that was actually like a world building issue that I wanted to like harmonize, because I was like, of course there's going to be guns, but there's also going to be like jade power, and they're going to like live together, right? Like there's going to be a jade powered way to blunt the effect of like someone else having a firearm, but like firearms are still going to be able to kill you. So that's something as well, that like the sort of modern technology living alongside magic, and them sort of both coexisting. It's not like either magic or tech, it's like magic and tech. And that's the same thing with like the development of Shine, because oftentimes in fantasy novels you have like magic, but like only certain people with this bloodline can use it. And I've kind of said, yeah, okay, but now we have like pharmaceuticals that are going to change that equation, because of course, if there was a magic that only certain people could use, you'd bet there'd be scientists trying to figure out how to like circumvent that with modern methods. So all of those things, and like more, recent and world history all kind of feed in.
So moving away a little bit from like general themes into more just like everything bucket of questions. We have some news of like a TV adaptation in the works. Can you share anything about that? Are you going to be involved in the process? Do you have any dream fan casts? Anything for the readers to just get a little bit of something?
So the TV show is in development. Everything in Hollywood happens glacially slowly. And I do know that a pilot script has been written and submitted to the network. So we're waiting to hear back on that. My role as an author with the TV show adaptation is an interesting one because I don't control that process. Obviously, that lies with the screenwriter and the producers and so on. But I am involved from a consultative standpoint. So I am seeing things and getting a sense of what they're doing, and I get to weigh in. So I'll be very interested to see how all that happens. I have no control over casting. Please do not send your casting choices to me. I know, but I mean, I'm hopeful that the development process will continue and that I'll have more news to share. I mean, it has certainly been interesting just to even see how things work on the Hollywood side, and adapting a novel into a television show is challenging because the format is so different. Like instead, I have the leisure of like 600 pages to tell you the story, and show writers have like an episodic format where it's like they have to tell a mini story in like every single episode, and they probably have, I don't know, like 2 minutes in the pilot episode to like sell it to the network kind of thing. So like it is a different process. I'm excited to see where it goes. You guys will know what I know when I can share it.
The tweets that have come out of it are so funny. I think I saw someone tweet like, how do I be an extra? How do I get hired as the dishwasher at the Twice Lucky? And I hope we get to see you make a cameo.
I mean, I would love that. I will be a dishwasher at the Twice Lucky. I mean, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I hope we get to see you as a cameo in one of the episodes too.
Oh, I'm gonna petition for that. Like, I'll just walk on. Like, I don't have to do anything. I just want to walk onto the set. That'd be very cool.
I remember seeing tweets too that were like, "Is any man sexy enough to be Hilo?" And I was, that's a good question.
Casting is gonna stress me out.
Do you get to find out as they're doing the process, or is it kind of just like they make the solid choices and then they tell you afterwards?
I do get a heads up of like what's going on, but I think not like to an extent that I would have any like influence in the direction of like production. Right now we're in the script writing, so I do feel pretty looped in to what's going on that side because it's a writer adapting my books. So the fact that he can get in touch with me and be like, so in chapter this, like, what would you? So he will come to me with questions and like how they might be adapted for a script. Things are very. It's interesting that like the choices that you have to make for script versus TV, and like some of them I'm going to really agree with, and some of them I probably won't, and we'll sort of see what happens.
Would it be like one season is one book?
So right now the plan is that the first book is 2 seasons. So it would, yes.
Her eyes just got huge.
So you can imagine where season 1 ends. Let's put it that way.
Oh, yes.
I'm not ready. I'm like, I'm not ready.
Oh, that's a brutal ending for people who might only be watching the show and not have read the book.
Right. So
Well, I think it would encourage people to go read the book. So this is a good thing. It's a good thing.
I also listened to this on audiobook while I was reading, and the beginning and the ending of the audiobook have like some really nice action music.
Oh, the music is
see
so
it being
cool.
Perfect.
I have to say, like, yes, they did a very nice job with the audiobook. Both Andrew Kashino, who is the narrator, does a very good job bringing it to life. And then that like intro and outro music. Wow.
It makes me feel like I can like climb up a wall or something.
Oh, I know. It's so good.
I mean, since you mentioned that the TV show is kind of moving at a glacial pace and we're kind of wrapping up like your time with the Greenbone saga since Jade Legacy is coming out, is there anything new that's coming up that you're maybe thinking of? Any passion projects that you've been waiting to get a head start on?
Well, you know, because I've lived in Greenbone Saga world for so long, I'm almost like spoiled with possibilities at this point, because there's been every project I thought of for like the last 6 years. I've been like, yeah, I have to wait until like after Greenbone Saga is done. And so now that Greenbone Saga is coming to a close, I'm like, what do I do? Like, there's just too many choices. But the first thing I'm going to do is write a few shorter works, because I need to reset my brain after writing an epic fantasy trilogy. I don't want this current trajectory, which is like longer and longer and longer. Like, next thing I know, I'll be, you know, in George R. R. Martin territory. So I'm resetting my brain a little bit. I have 2 novellas that are going to come out, neither of which is announced yet. One of them will be a Greenbone Saga novella. So you're hearing it from me first. There will be one. It will be different characters with cameos of some characters that you are familiar with. And then I have another project that is not announced yet that I'm working on, and then maybe at that point I have this other big series that has been percolating in my brain, that I'm going to keep under wraps for now, but that'll probably be my next big project. So I've got a couple of novellas, another novel in the works, and then another series that I will tell you more about as I get closer to it.
That's so exciting.
We're being fed. I'm so happy.
I was like, wow, we're being fed, we're blessed.
Do you feel very personally like heartbroken that you have to part with these characters? Or are you like ready to do something new? Like, I like love you, Hilo, but go enjoy your time.
Oh, both at the same time. So I'm excited to tackle new projects, but I also am really, I mean, I don't know how to leave these characters in a way, because it does feel like I have lived with this family for 6 years, and I know these characters so well, and have been with them through a lot of ups and downs. And so it does feel very bittersweet to be coming to the end of the trilogy. And everything that I write now feels, every like new project that I write now, I'm like, who are these people? I don't know them. You know, so I'm being in a position to create new characters is interesting, because on one hand, I'm like, oh, I get to do something new. On the other hand, it'll be a long time before I know them to the extent that I know the Call family. So, you know, I take comfort in the fact that like the 3rd book is turned in, but there is still more Greenbone Saga stuff that I will be working on for a while, and then the book will launch, and there'll be energy around that and getting to talk about it. So it won't leave me. I'll still be able to work on new stuff and have, which is also great, because like I have other things I want to work on without, giving this up. So, and I think every writer reaches this point, goes through ups and downs. There's times when you're like, oh God, like I'm so sick of editing this book. Like I just need it to be done. Just be done. Like just go away. So you reach that point because you've seen these words and read these books. I mean, I have read Jade Legacy now. I mean, I cannot even, and it is a big book. I mean, I'm reading it over and over again, right? For copy editing and proofreading. And so there is a point where you're like, I am tired of this. And then by the time it goes away for a while and then it's turned into a book and comes back, and you're like, it's real, it's done. Like it's a thing now.
My child.
You get excited about it again. Yeah.
I don't know if you like want to share, but are you planning on like moving into different genres, exploring different, like, because this one's more like modern day fantasy. Are you trying to like stay within that realm or move into something different?
So so both. So I mean, I write both science fiction and fantasy, and like even my fantasy is modern. So I have but I definitely span both. Like I have an idea that is like more of a I guess, ancient fantasy, like pre-modern. That's one of the novellas is going to be like a pre-modern sort of fantasy. But then I also have like this big like space opera idea that is like that I'm excited about. So, so like I think for me, like the genre matters less than the characters and the ideas, and then I'll like find, and also like the vibe, the aesthetic. Like almost every single one of my books has just been me excited about different things and like finding a way to mash them together. So, you know, almost certainly, you know, anime is going to like be one of the influences in my future work as a result of like all the anime I've watched over this year of pandemic. So, you know, there's whatever it is, there's whether or not that's like taking influence from one genre and smashing it into another, or like taking a certain type of story but putting it in a very different milieu. Like that's the sort of stuff I love to do.
We're so excited for whatever you have next. We'll be here for it. We love Jade City so much. But since Subtle Asian Book Club is dedicated to boosting API voices and stories, were there any organizations or events you'd like to spotlight or support?
Well, right now is a pretty hard time with the anti-Asian violence and hate that's going on. So, you know, you all know that there's a lot of conversation that is happening over that. And so I have been trying to support and spotlight some of the organizations that are addressing that. So one of them, for example, is Compassion in Oakland, which is an organization that has been providing chaperones for elderly members of the Asian community in the Bay Area. I also want to give a shout out to the Wing Luke Museum, which is a little museum in Seattle, which is lovely. And I visited a number of times, that is focused. My apologies, that is my dog. And she's getting excited about the mailman, the delivery man. So back to the Wing Luke Museum. It is this museum in Seattle that really spotlights the Asian and Pacific Islander experience. It has all these wonderful exhibits about migration and the Asian American experience, and all sorts of Asian American artists and creators. So if you are in Seattle and get a chance to visit it, please do.
Yeah, I think I saw like a tour of it on TikTok a couple of days ago, ironically.
Cool.
And I was like, oh, whoa, I want to go to Seattle now. It looks so beautiful. And I just want to immerse myself in all the art and stories and everything.
So as we start to wrap things up, we wanted to move into more fun questions just to ask you. And obviously Jade Legacy is a 2021 release we're all super excited for, but is there a 2020 release that you're like personally really excited for that's not your own?
Gosh, so there's always like a ton of like books that I get excited about, and then like they go onto my TBR and I read them like 3 years later. So I'm sure you can all relate to that. But I do get, one of the benefits of being an author is I do get advanced copies of stuff oftentimes to blurb. So one book that is coming out that would be of interest to the Subtle Asian Book Club would be Blackwater Sister by Zen Cho. And it is a modern fantasy novel set in current day Malaysia. And it's got like ghosts and like gentrification and like all these, and this just such a great voice. So I blurbed that recently, and I think that comes out in May. And then I have an ARC, but I have not read it yet, of She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. But it's also up there on my TBR.
That is very high up on our TBR. We have certain plans for that, but nothing revealed yet.
This is one of my most anticipated of 2021.
Is there a book that you would recommend to everyone? Does it have to be released this year?
Oh gosh.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so hard because like everyone has, you know, their wheelhouse of like what their preferred books are. But I really recommend reading Ted Chiang's short stories, because short stories don't get read as widely as novels do. And Ted Chiang is one of those writers in science fiction who like writes one short story like every 2 years, and it's brilliant. It gets turned into like a movie and wins all the awards. And then, you know, it's another 3 years, and then he writes one more short story, and it's also so. Like, if you do get a chance to pick up his short story collection, I think he has 2 of them. I think the most recent one is Exhalation. You know, the most one of the stories there was turned into Arrival. So he's just one of those writers who has who is such craft and skill with ideas in the science fiction space that and they're short. So you know, I think he would be a great person for everyone to read more of.
Oh, I wanted to ask, we know you're watching Attack on Titan because we've been seeing you tweet about it, but are there any anime that you think haven't really gotten the hype yet, that you personally are obsessed with, that you love, that you want everyone to kind of jump on the hype train for?
Oh gosh.
Take notes.
I mean, see, the thing is, I haven't. I'm a relative anime noob because I've been watching a lot of anime, but like I feel like I've been watching a lot of the ones that everyone like loves and is already super hyped for. But I mean, I love Haikyuu. It's probably my most like unexpected favorite anime, because like I knew I would like Attack. I knew I would love Attack on Titan. I knew that I would love Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. You know, so like that was like, but Haikyuu I like did not expect to get so emotionally invested in that show. Holy smokes. It's like an entire season is one volleyball game. I mean, I don't even really watch volleyball, but
I think that's how everyone.
Yeah, so I was very like surprised by how personally invested I became. I was like, I don't even watch sports, so why am I so into the sports anime? But the next one of the next ones I'm determined to watch is Steins Gate, which I think gets like less love, but like almost everyone I know is like, this would be up your alley. Like, you should watch Steins Gate. So that's what's next for me.
I feel like it's one of the best isekai anime that people don't hype up, because people were really into Sword Art Online, I think, at the time of like the video game stuck in a different world type genre was popular, but Steins Gate is fantastic.
I'm excited.
We've been
so much anime,
about.
so little time.
I think Jujutsu Kaisen is also ending soon too, which is also super hyped.
Yeah.
I read it yesterday. It is fantastic.
Oh, yeah, so much. I mean, this is why, I mean, I can't watch One Piece, because I'm like, I could watch like 12 anime in the time.
So, as another fun question, do you want to share like what each character's quarantine hobby would be? Would any of them be watching anime?
Oh goodness. So I feel like Lon would probably be doing like very responsible things. Like he's pillar. He'd be like appearing on television and like meeting with clan stakeholders to like lay out new like social distancing guidelines for businesses and like all that sort of stuff. You know, Andon is probably hanging out, like doing okay, you know, reading and watching TV and fixing things around the house. Hilo's going stir crazy, so he's like probably like got a bunch of fists who have been like tested, and so they're healthy, and he's just holding like Fight Club on the lawn. And then I think I actually tweeted this at one point at the beginning of the pandemic. I actually tweeted like, here's what is going on in KCON. So I'm trying to remember what I said. Wen is probably redecorating the house, and also thinking about how to like turn this like into a public relations win for the clan. And then Shay's probably might be watching like some trashy TV, but also she's probably like on the phone like doing business stuff and policy stuff and like help figuring out how to like reassure all the lantern men.
We had a comment that said Lon would probably be bonsai gardening, which I can see.
Yeah, I can see that too. See Lon bonsai gardening for sure. If he had any time, it would be one of those things that like Lon would want to do, like when he has time, and then he would never have time. So he would like have all the like equipment and the plants and all that, and like he would always be trying to find more time to do it.
Yeah.
And then do you want to share like a food recommendation, like your favorite food in general? Because that ties into the next question, which was one that I was really excited for.
I really don't have a favorite food. And the reason is because I love all food. Like seriously, I just love food. Like I can't pick a favorite because like every food, just all food. I mean, do you ever see those quizzes or those memes online where it's like, 1 point for each of these things that you've eaten? And they're not even very exotic. It's like tofu, oysters, right? Like I always get a near perfect score on all of those. Like there is like almost nothing I will not eat. Like I just love food a lot.
Breana's dog is named Tofu.
Yeah, named Tofu. That's why I've been muting myself, because she's making some noise with her squeaky toy in the background.
That's adorable.
Have you tried coconut worms?
I have not tried coconut worms.
So I tried it when I was in Vietnam, and they basically take them like fresh out of the tree, and it's like squirming, and then you dip it in fish sauce, and then you just eat it. And then
where's the coconut?
It's in a coconut tree. So then like they drink. Yeah. So then they pull the worm out. I don't think they're called coconut worms, but that's just how I remember it because they're in coconut trees. So like, they pull them out, and then you eat it, and it's like this fat worm thing. I think that's the most exotic thing I've ever eaten, that I'm like, has anyone else tried this and can commiserate with me on a traumatizing experience?
I have not. I mean, I wouldn't say I wouldn't do it, but like I think I draw the line on the thing still being alive.
Yeah.
Like if they killed it and then prepared it in a way that was appetizing, that would be one thing. But like, I don't know, like if it's the alive part would be like probably a no-go.
So that brings us to the question that I've been really excited for, which is that Hilo's favorite dish at the Twice Lucky are the fried octopus balls. Do you want to share what the other characters' favorite dishes would be?
Oh, yeah, the crispy squid balls, man, they keep coming back. It's like the signature dish of the Twice Lucky now. Favorite foods of the other characters. I mean, I do think, if I'm recalling correctly in canon, that Shay really likes spicy noodle soup. And gosh, I don't know what his favorite food would be. I don't know if he has a favorite food. If you can think of one, let me know. When I'm almost certain has a secret sweet tooth and really loves like fruit paste buns, and stuff like that. I do know Nico's favorite food is fried bread. But that's something you guys don't know yet.
We will.
And I just let out something I shouldn't have. But so if you don't know what that is, that's okay. Just pretend you did hear it.
Just read the next book. It's fine. You're fine.
It's fine.
I was about to say, I was like...
Mm-hmm. So those were all the questions that we had prepared. If there are any questions that other people want to ask, I know we're getting close to, we're kind of over time, but it's fine. If there's anything like Fonda Lee wants to say as like a lasting message to your fans, if there's anywhere we can pre-order the book, maybe get a signed copy, any virtual book tour plans, even those really early?
Yeah, so a bit early for any concrete plans yet. Pre-order isn't up yet, but hopefully will be soon, and I'll blast it out on every form I have. So if you follow me on social media, on Twitter, where I'm at Fonda J. Lee, or at my website on Instagram, once those pre-order links go up, I will definitely share them. There will be stuff going on, events and launch celebrations and blog tour and stuff like that happens closer to the date. So yeah, just basically stay tuned. I'm really excited to get Jade Legacy into everyone's hands. More Greenbone Saga content. I do have plans to put out a couple bonus scenes in advance of Jade Legacy coming out. So my plan is in the months leading up to it, I'll put out some extra content. And yeah, it'll be, I'm as excited as you are. I am equally excited to get this book into everyone's hands, and I'm really happy with the way that it all wrapped up. There's definitely times when I'm like, this thing is a beast. How is it all going to come together? But boy, it feels, I just feel like having just finished copy edits this week. Oh, it feels good. I'm
getting emotional.
We gotta brace ourselves.
And I think Fonda also tweeted that if you get like a tattoo of the Greenbone Saga, maybe you can get like a signed copy. If anyone's interested in that.
I cannot think of a better reason to send someone a signed copy. So yes.
Yeah, Leatherman's
I mean, until I run out of signed copies.
Somewhere.
Yeah. But I mean, I'll definitely share some. Hopefully there will be once arcs start coming out and plans start getting made, I will definitely let you guys all know that.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. It was such an honor to have you. Everyone was super excited. We're all in tears over the book. We can't wait to read the next book and then the book after that, and then novella in the works, which we're also really excited about. So yeah, thank you so much for being here today. We were so thrilled to have you.
Next
month we will be reading The Mountains Sing. Do you guys want to share any other details?
Oh, and then also we're sorry. I was like, wait, I'm supposed to say something. But we're also collaborating with Eastwind Books for The Mountains Sing. So if you want to support indie bookstores and also get a signed copy of Mountain Sings, we'll have links to that somewhere. It's on our socials. It'll be in this video somewhere. But yeah.
You get 10% off, and Eastwind Books of Berkeley is an Asian-owned bookstore that's a mainstay of the Bay. So definitely check that out if you guys are interested.
And you get a signed book plate.
Yeah.
So we hope to see you in April. If you want to talk about Jade City, if you want to talk about Jade War, join our Discord, join our Facebook, at anyone at Subtle Asian Book Club. We're always happy to talk about these books. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.